Hey everyone, welcome to Out of the Reads with me, your host, Natasha. And today on the show, it is just me, guys. This is our sixth episode, and this time it is just me. We are talking about the art of coming back to yourself today. So I figured there's some things that I could share and kind of highlight my experience. Obviously, the first episode was just the intro to the show and why I started this. But I figured we could dive a little bit deeper today, and I have some questions that I wanted to answer that have to do a lot about this topic and this journey. And so I know the past couple of episodes I've been pulling cards, which is something that I always love to do. But this episode kind of made me feel like maybe coming back to the roots a little bit. And so I figured we'd get into the reads with a poem first. I actually wrote it not too long ago. Side note. So it is untitled currently, but it really does speak to the whole episode today. So let's get into it. I lost myself along the way, down the path and far away. I'm not sure when. I'm not sure where. Maybe along the rocks close to the shore, in the sea of so much more. I just know she who was is no longer there. Would she hide, scared out in the wide open wild? Would she call for help despite her pride? Maybe she is found, now that she is free. Maybe she is more close to who she needs to be. I say I lost her, the she that's part of me, but maybe she is truly home and right where she needs to be. She does not boast or brag of all the wisdom she gained from a journey so entertained by friend and foe. All the same, she is changed forevermore. But I love her just as much as before. Truth be told, maybe more, for I see her now in all her glory, the wild moon child glistening by the sea. Welcome home, my lovely. So that's just something that I wrote in honor, obviously, of this episode and the art of coming back to yourself. I mean, especially after motherhood, there's so much that can be said about that. And I actually want to take it to our first question. When did you first feel like yourself again after becoming a mother? I have to say, when I first started feeling like myself again, I was probably, I can't give you an actual pinpoint, I mean, as to the date, but what started to feel like I was coming back to myself was when I started with my artwork and taking time for myself, creating in the shower. That project, the heart project that I started, which I will show you right here, just some of the artwork that you can make sense of. I was losing a lot of my hair postpartum. And as a result, I didn't want to snake the drain constantly. So I would make these art images on my shower walls with my hair. And the length of a shower, I mean, that's all that I had really to try to come back to myself. And in doing so, I was really able to start to feel like the person I had lost again. It was such a shift coming from having no children and I was an only child. So for me, I wasn't around babies a lot. I had cousins and stuff like that, but everybody, again, like I'm a first generation American, so all of my extended family was in other countries. So I didn't grow up with a lot of like little people around. So, but I always knew I wanted to be a mom. So I just kind of imagined that that was going to be part of my journey. But I really didn't know what that would look like when the baby was actually here, when my first son was actually here. You have an idea of what it's going to be like. I used to babysit growing up. And so I've always loved children. So I was like, I got this. I know it's going to be tough, but I got it. It's going to be fine. And then you actually have a baby. And for me, that jump from 0 to 1 was astronomical. Uh, It was life altering. I had and dealt with a lot of anxiety that I didn't realize, a lot of postpartum rage and just feelings that I was losing myself. So when this opportunity came to actually start creating and putting myself out there again in a way that felt like I knew this person. I knew the creative person. It started to really bring me back to myself, and I was really able to find myself again, you know. And then, of course, that led to my book, you know, The Art of Motherhood. So all the artwork, and then, as you've heard, the poetry and everything like that morphed into me being able to find a way back to myself after having my son. And I think that's really what helped. That was the first time that I started to feel like I know who this person is again. And so then I also started with trying to create a business called My Tribe. And My Tribe was birthed out of the idea of incorporating a lot of the things of myself. This here was my partner at the time, Natalie, who she came on after. I had tried to build My Tribe up several times, at least twice. And the second go of it that I was making, Natalie came in, and she was also a mom of two at the time, and she was a military spouse and from Scotland, and we met in our birthing class together with our first children. And her background was in marketing, and so we both just had a desire to create community, which is essentially what My Tribe was all about. So the first time that I created My Tribe, this is the logo for it, and this is doing postpartum yoga with my son. And, eventually I did sound bath work, like working with other providers and trying to create community. We would do events and things like that. So the whole idea of My Tribe came out of the fact that, I'm a licensed clinical social worker. So there was a therapy piece. So I was providing therapeutic services, which were separate from the rest of My Tribe, which was like a three-pronged approach. So I was trying to create community because, sitting at home nursing alone, I just felt like, where's my tribe? Where's my tribe of people, women who are doing this in unison? And this was pre-COVID. So this was, before all of that. And so I wanted to be able to gather women together and create community. I wanted to do events, my family, my background, some of the stuff that you may have seen on social media. And if you haven't, my family background is in ballroom dancing and putting on events, dance competitions and things like that. So I've had a lot of experience growing up in event planning and seeing it. And so wanting to bring community together, wanting to put on and host events that facilitated community and sisterhood is something that was really near and dear to my heart. And then, of course, I was a yoga instructor and a therapist. So I was trying to incorporate all of these things together in one spot, but I'm one person. And even though I had Natalie's help when I was trying to make a go of it the second time around, it was just a lot to lift up. And I was really, really looking to run before I could walk. And I wanted to fly before I could even crawl. So I was really trying to make it happen. And I believed in it so much. But again, just one person. So while the birth of My Tribe was very fulfilling and allowed for me to also feel like I came back to myself, the death of My Tribe was even more debilitating. I really grieved and mourned the loss of something that I had put so much of my effort and heart and self into. And after becoming a mom, it's just like, this is not to minimize anything or even to make the comparison, but it felt like something I birthed. And to watch it burn essentially, or to feel like it failed, was really heartbreaking. And eventually, I was able to pivot and come into something else. But the book was after My Tribe, and it was something that allowed me to feel like I was coming back into myself all over again, coming back into another stage of my motherhood all over again after the failure of My Tribe. And I mean, I don't want to look at it as even a failure. I think it's just pivoting. I tried something, it didn't work out, and it really did allow me to come back to who I am and who I needed to be as a person. So, yeah, I think it just all worked out in the end anyway. Now, let's go to our second question, though. What did the return look like? Was it sudden or gradual? So, the return to myself, was it sudden or gradual? I think it was definitely gradual. The more I went to take showers and create artwork, the more I started to build community and found people who were like-minded, were in the same stage of life as myself, and understood kind of the struggles of what it felt like to be a new mom. I think it started to finally allow for me to come back to, you're not alone. This is normal. This is a new you. And even though there are parts of myself that I did eventually come back to that were like the quote unquote old me, my creativity, which is something that, I've mentioned before and is a perpetual theme in my life. So that has always felt like me and the return to me. But also coming into a new stage of life, into this new me who's taking parts of the old with her, but also moving into something different. So I think it was definitely a gradual coming together of everything. Yeah. And also rediscovering who I was, because after my tribe collapsed, it was like, well, now who am I? Who is this person who birthed something and then it failed, and then I need to come back and find out what I am again and what I'm going to be. And so that was a whole nother rebirthing of myself after that. What helped the most and what surprised you about what helped? The thing that was surprising is how much time I needed to myself. So I think what was really shocking is that my life before having children was filled with, at times, a lot of solitude. I lived alone before I got married. And then when we got married, it was just the two of us. And we had friends and social lives, but a lot of my friends, my core group of friends moved to different places. So I kind of spent more time alone in that stage of my life. So I was really craving a lot of people. I needed people. I really wanted that. And again, created my tribe for community, wanted that so badly. But what I also realized as well that was surprising was, especially having my second son, I needed more time to recharge by myself. And I felt like, there's just so much of you that is constantly like, you have a toddler, then you have a baby, and you're touched out a lot of the time. And, then you have, you're a wife and you have a husband, and you've got all these things going on, and a lot of demands of your attention and demands of your time and your physical body and your being, that eventually you just want a break. You just want a few minutes alone to yourself. And I think that was another reason why the art was so life-giving at that time for me, because I was alone at times in the shower. I didn't have the baby with me then, or the babies with me then. I was just by myself in there. And I think that is what allowed me to also realize you need to recharge alone. You need to have time where you're just by yourself to be able to come back to who you are. And I don't think I realized that, even though I think I've probably mostly been for most of my life, like teetering between an introvert and an extrovert. But it really started to become more apparent the further I got into my motherhood that I definitely needed time to recharge alone. And yes, I needed the sisterhood and I needed the community, but I also needed solitude. So that's something that I think helped a lot and surprised me quite a bit as well. So for our next question, here, what do you want to tell the woman you were at her lowest point? And what I would say is I definitely don't think it was just one point in coming back to myself that was the lowest. think it was definitely a series of moments that really attributed to that overall sense of feeling low and not feeling like myself anymore. Kind of like, again, the coming back to yourself, it being a gradual process. I definitely think that it was also a gradual process in realizing, oh, this is really what's making me feel so disconnected from myself. And I think the hours spent alone at home when my husband, Justin, when he would go to work. And even though my mom lived close by, and there was a support system, she also having a life or feeling like I just needed someone to sit next to me on the couch to talk to me, to make me feel that this was okay. It's so funny. Actually, I do remember so many people when they knew that I was going to do an unmedicated birth. They're like, "Aren't you like scared of birth? Like, aren't you afraid of the pain, or don't you want to take medication? It could be so much easier." And this was for just my own personal, mountain to climb. This is something I always knew I wanted to do. My grandmother had done it, my mother had done it. And so it was something that felt like a calling to my womanhood. So I was not fearful about the birth, but what I was fearful of before the baby was here was like the nursing, because I knew that journey was going to be so much longer. Like birth, okay, like eventually it's over. You know, it, the the labor, however, and it can be very traumatic for some. It can be very non-traumatic for others, and I'm not minimizing that. But eventually at some time it ends, right? The baby is here. And so for me, it was the idea of now the baby is here and now the journey really begins. And I was fortunate enough that I was able to nurse. I know not everyone is, and that's also not everyone's choice. But for me, it was something that if I was able to, I wanted to experience. And knowing that the nursing journey really relied on me. Like, I didn't pump just because that started to feel like a job. And I was fortunate enough that I was working from home. So I didn't really need to worry about that at that time. So I knew that it all just relied on me. Like my husband couldn't wake up in the middle of the night. Justin couldn't go and just like, I'm going to nurse our kid. Like, I mean, everybody has their own path and their own way about doing it. But for me, I just felt like, what's the point? Like, I'm going to need to have him anyway. The 2 steps it takes for you to do it and then go back to bed, doesn't really do much, in the solidarity, and he did as much as he could, and he did feel bad. I know for him, he felt bad that he couldn't do more because, I wasn't pumping that much. And I do remember when occasionally I didn't do it like, religiously or anything like that. So occasionally I would. And I have like a really cute picture of the 2 of them, Justin holding our oldest son, Oliver, and giving him a bottle. And he looks so elated. And part of me does feel kind of bad now that like maybe I should have done this more for his relationship, and they have a great one. So it's not like it's neither here nor there, but I think maybe he would have enjoyed to be able to feed our kids. But that's not really the path that I went down. So like the nighttime was always really nerve-wracking and anxiety provoking for me because I didn't know how the boys would sleep. Would they sleep well? Would they not sleep well? And being frayed with the lack of sleep, I think was really when things started to get really low. When the boys started sleeping better and getting a little bit older, I think that's when I started to really feel like, oh my gosh, okay, you know? And I feel like I've heard so many moms say this, I just need 4 hours. I can do it if I just get 4 hours of sleep. Like 3 doesn't feel like nearly enough. Yeah, and when I would get 4 hours of sleep, it was like, "Oh my gosh, hallelujah. I have a chance now to be present, to be a functioning human being." But when that wasn't achieved or when, I just felt the deep loneliness of being at home and not having the tribe around me and feeling like that's all I wanted. Um, I think that was definitely a time when I would tell her, it's going to get better. It's going to get easier. You're not going to be in this stage of motherhood for the rest of your life. It feels like that sometimes. It feels like the endless Groundhog Day that, that movie with Bill Murray. It's like he just keeps repeating the same day over and over and over again. And it does feel like that. The monotony of early motherhood, especially with your first. The experience I had with my second son was very different because I knew what I was going into and I knew where I had been. And of course, every baby's different. My second baby was not the same as my first baby. And I was not the same as I was the first time around. So, yeah, it hit differently the second time around. And I'm sure for mothers who have more than just two, you know, it also feels different with a third or a fourth and beyond because each time you're a different shade of yourself. You're not the same woman who gave birth the first time as you did the last time. I think that's also something that brings hope, you know, to that woman is it's not going to look like this the next time you have a child. And this stage won't last forever. They will grow out of it, and so will you. So that's definitely what I would say. That nursing and sleeping were probably definitely the lowest points of coming back to myself. And when those things, really hit, I would definitely want to give myself a big hug and just say that I see you. I know you're doing the best you can. This is all new to you. You have been birthed just like you birthed a baby. I think sometimes that gets overlooked for moms. And I think the shift is starting to change a little bit with the sentiment, but so much emphasis has been on birthing the baby and the baby is here. But like, what about birthing the mom? And that's why like doulaship, having a doula, that was another thing that like I had a postpartum doula the second time around. And that was something that really brought me back to myself heavily. And for all of you who are listening that maybe are pregnant or, you're thinking of having more children, oh my gosh, having a postpartum doula is like life altering. Mine was amazing. Her name was Allison, and she lives in Gainesville. And she would come in and she would like massage my body for like an hour and a half with sesame seed oil, which was really heating. And they say Ayurvedically that your body, after expelling so much, your baby, your placenta, all the fluid, it can leave the body feeling cold. So the idea of bringing back heat into the body with warming oils and warming food, she would bring soups and stews for me, and she would bring desserts filled with ghee and just things that were really nourishing to the body. She bound my stomach. We did like a closing of the bones ceremony. It was just a beautiful experience and one that honestly like lasted not long enough. Every time Allison came over, it was like the highlight for me. I could nurse him while she was giving me a massage, so I never felt like I was neglecting anything. I wasn't neglecting myself. I was able to be with the baby if I needed to be. And it was just a really beautiful time. And that really, the second time around, really brought me back to myself a lot faster. The first time for me was like, oh my God, survival. Like, what am I going to do? I don't know enough. Like, and I had a doula. I had a doula for my birth with my first son and for my second. But the postpartum, that was like, oh, that was money. That was the best investment I could have made for myself because it really regulated my nervous system. And I was able to have more space and really have a lot more love for myself that I was able to then trickle down to my toddler, trickle to my husband, trickle to the baby was already a given, but it spread around because I was regulated. And I think the awareness that we have societally now around birth is more than previously. And it's funny because it's also something that seems what should seem very natural, and in tribal societies and in other cultures, it is natural. It is more of like the ritual that's brought back into closing yourself up again and coming back to wholeness after such expansion. Your body literally expanded, literally pushed a human out. And now we're trying to come back in, close the wounds, bring things back together so that you can function and go about being this version of yourself again. So those are all the things I would definitely say to myself at the lowest. This phase is not going to last forever. Get a postpartum doula the next time. And, just have some grace for yourself. Journal, write, whatever you're feeling, which, can be really helpful in processing all of that stuff. So that is definitely what I would say to myself. So I think what I'd like to close out with for our 6th episode is that I feel like I've learned a little bit from each of the episodes that we've had thus far. I've learned about myself now as a podcaster, coming into my own and coming back to what I feel like is something that I have probably always wanted to do. And I'm now doing it, which is hosting a podcast and interviewing and sharing stories of women who I believe are very inspirational and I feel like have a story to tell. So, thing that I know now about myself after doing 6 episodes of podcasting is that I am finally feeling open to receiving guidance from others about how to make something the best possible. I was literally sharing this with my mom the other day, and I think in my younger years, anytime I created something or made art, I took things very personally. Obviously, like I told you about my tribe, that's something I created. It felt so personal to me. And when things were failing, I started to look at it as a failure of myself. Like there's times where people would bring it up, like in our friend groups, and they'd be like, "So, how's it going with my tribe?" And I'd be like, I'd get this feeling inside, like, "Oh, please don't ask me about that. It's not going well, and I don't know what to say about it." And it feels not shameful, but like, wow, I failed, and I don't know how to talk about this failure publicly. But the podcast and podcasting now, even though this is something I'm creating, I don't feel that kind of attachment to it. I enjoy the show. I believe in it. I love sharing stories, but I want to make it the best possible. So if people have recommendations for me or things they would love to hear about or ways to make the show better, I feel like I welcome it. If somebody has something to say that's like blatantly negative, okay, whatever, that can like kind of go over through one ear and out the other. But if it's constructive and it's like, I think this would be great on the show, or if you did this on the show, I feel now in such a better place to be able to receive that. So, all that to say that after 6 episodes, I feel like I have learned how to continue to try to make a good show as best as possible and be open to whatever that looks like. So, thank you all for stepping into the reads with me. And I can't wait to bring you next week's episode. It's going to be a mother-daughter episode. So, if you want to listen with your mom, if you want your mom to listen, that's what this is going to be about next week. So, I'm really excited to be able to interview my mom. And it's not only going to just be about, her and I, but also, how it is for her with her mother and where she's at now, my grandmother. And so that kind of generational relationship between mother to daughter to grandmother and so on and so forth. So check it out. For those of you who do not follow or don't know where to, I am on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube. So please follow along, like, share, subscribe. It really does help grow the podcast and get people aware of where they can find us, how they can listen in. And if you know of anyone who, is in the early stages of motherhood, they're looking to try to figure out maybe just some inspiration to get back to themselves, please recommend this show to them. And feel free to comment. Like I said, I love to hear ways that the show can be better, and what it can do, who we could interview. I would love to hear from you guys. So please, again, like, share, subscribe, and I can't wait to see you on the other side. of Out of the Reeds. Thank you guys.